intrahepatic stretch due to viral hepatitis, liver abscess, hepatocellular carcinoma. All these can present as pain rather than a discomfort. So discomfort indicates more of an extrahepatic. Extrahepatic. And the other cause would be, what's the third important cause of abdominal pain in cholestatic jaundice? Gallbladder malignancy.
Gallbladder malignancy, yes, ma'am.
These are the three important causes of pain that you can get in patients with. A typical pain of extrahepatic stone disease will be colicky with fever. So if you have pain and fever, it's almost diagnostic of extrahepatic. If you do not have fever, it does not exclude the possibility.
Okay.
But you have to still consider the possibility. So so the bottom line is jaundice, sudden onset, insidious in nature, pale stool, no prodromal symptoms, and there is fatigability. Either it's of lack of intake or whatever it is. And what is your interpretation of this pain in the right shoulder?
The right shoulder pain could be an referred pain from the gallbladder. Sometimes cholelithiasis could present as an right upper
would
shoulder
pain. Would you get a pain from February to the month of June, July, August? One is, so common things are common. It could just be an arthritic pain, arthralgic pain. Number two could be referred, but referred pain would not be a continuous pain. It will be short-lasting. It will be related to the disease of the gallbladder.
Okay.
Dr. Sharman, at this stage, any questions?
Yeah, so whenever you're asked this question about the shoulder pain, so the way to answer would be, either is it related or is it unrelated?
Okay, sir.
So one is a situation where it is unrelated, like arthritic kind of a pain. But again, in a 52-year-old, it is difficult to explain that unless there is some injury or something of that sort. So the other thing is that if it is related, if you have to explain both together, if he's on gabapentin or say any other medicines along with that for this pain and from February, so it's a reasonable time. So is this drug induced? So that also you have to keep in mind. The second thing is when you have said there is no prodrome and you have easy fatigability for 2 weeks. So it is not very unusual to report easy fatigability by itself qualifies as a prodromal symptom. So don't take away that. Okay, it's not only nausea, vomiting, fever is not your prodrome. So you can have easy fatigability itself as a manifestation of prodrome. So don't take away the possibility of a cholestatic phase of viral hepatitis. Yeah.
Okay.
And it is you cannot give very extremes that this can be extrahepatic also, intrahepatic also, malignant also, benign also. At this stage, if you have to commit accepted that it is cholestatic, since there is pain, we are thinking of, and it's a biliary kind of a pain, we are thinking in terms of extrahepatic, benign or malignant. If you have to choose one, which would you put over the other?
So at first I will put benign, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So that is very important. Why would you put benign above?
So very short span, very short history, sir. And basically very short history of the patient. Preferably I'll go for a benign thing, sir.
So whenever you are asked to interpret about what do you make out of this, so you have to tell us, one, whether it is painless jaundice, painful jaundice, and then whether it was a short history or a long history. These two things are going to be very important. And then you talk about the associated cholestatic histories suggestive of any cholestasis.
Okay.
So this patient, painful jaundice, short duration, and there is some cholestatic features because there is pale stools. So these are the three ways you can summarize, and then you try to tell, like Madam said, intrahepatic, so three things you have to tell us at the end of history, whether it is cholestatic or not, intrahepatic or extrahepatic, and then you tell us whether you're thinking of a benign cause or a malignant cause.
Okay.
Painful, painless, and benign or malignant. Yeah.
Okay.
Next slide.
Patient with no history of abdominal distension, arterial edema, GI bleed or altered sensorium and oliguria. No history of anorexia, weight loss or early satiety. And no history of joint pain, oral ulcers, redness of eye, altered bowel habits with bleeding CR. No history of recurrent abdominal pain, no history of jaundice in past, no history of night sweat, and no evening rise of temperature, and no cough, no alcohol, tobacco consumption, or smoking.
Now, there are too many no histories in this, no? So
yes.
You should have so many no histories. So why would you ask so many no histories? The first one say, why do you want to ask for history of decompensation of this patient?
Because first is for the very short history, ma'am. Actually, pain abdomen is there, and this thing. So any outflow tract obstruction can have an acute ascites in both.
So if the patient did give history of abdominal distension, it will come as a chief complaint. No,
Chief complaint.
GI is important.
Yeah,
But the rest of it would automatically come as a chief complaint.
chief complaint.
Anorexia, weight loss is fine. Early satiety. Why should we ask for that? Anorexia, weight loss, and early satiety.
Early satiety, any for the abdomen, stomach-related issues, ma'am. Jaundice.
Such as
Early satiety, CA carcinoma can have
carcinoma stomach. You can get carcinoma stomach.
hepatitis. Total hepatitis cause an obstructive jaundice.
The next one was the joint pain, etc. Extra hepatic manifestations for.
IBD, ma'am. This one is for.
Yeah.
Joint
So
pain,
what will be the age of presentation and what's the link between the biliary involvement and IBD?
Ma'am, patients with PSC and IBD, ma'am, almost 80% of patients presenting with PSC, PSC will have an 80% will have an IBD, ma'am. It's the other way, very unlikely IBD patients having an PSC.
So extra, yeah, I think it is relevant. At least towards the end, at least you say the bowel movements are normal.
Normal.
It's normal. Then the whole thing goes off. Okay.
Okay,
But
ma'am.
they may be asymptomatic, and when you do a colonoscopy, you may find some changes in the colon.
Colon. Okay.
Recurrent abdominal pain you've already addressed to, just to know that we don't miss anything in the past.
Okay.
Night sweats, evening rise, fever, cough. Is anything relevant to this particular case? What do you think will be the presentation of hepatic tuberculosis or liver tuberculosis? Most of the times, the granulomatous liver disease is usually a disseminated.
Disseminated. Okay.
So systemic manifestations you should ask.
Okay.
And usually it's uncommon to present cholestatic jaundice. Very rare. First you'll have granuloma. By the time you'll have the systemic symptoms preceding the onset of jaundice.
Okay.
So those things will give you some clue that you may be dealing with a disseminated type of tuberculosis. Okay. Next slide. So now just read that.
History of Ayurvedic medicine intake, the powder form, thrice a week for the last 1 month. And the patient has an history of pulmonary coughs in 2007. ATT was taken for 6 months, and it was resolved. And there is no history of diabetes, hypertension, or bronchial asthma.
Okay.
Fog is 0. The patient is normal, and calorie intake is 2,200 kilocalories per day.
It's normal.
Normal. And protein intake is also almost 50 grams per day. And gives a family history of CA esophagus in uncle who has died 5 years ago at age of 75, and CA buccal mucosa in father who has died 4 years ago at age of 78.
So this you can just ask questions. Okay, Sharman?
Yeah. So what do you make out of this Ayurvedic medicine intake?
It's an CAM intake is there, sir. Ayurvedic medicine was taken for unknown reason, but it was taking it thrice a week for the last 1 month. So it could also be an likely cause for the cholestatic of the cholestasis of the patient history.
Okay, so you'll keep that in mind. And this history of pulmonary coughs, will it have any relevance to the current picture?
Sir, unlikely, sir. As Madam also said, the granulomatous presenting as cholestasis. Because the AT was taken around 13 years back, so unlikely, sir. This is.
And this family history, is it relevant?
Yeah, esophagus and buccal mucosa.
When is family history important? In other words, when you take a GI history, when is family history important?
Okay.
In what all conditions is family history important? Just list out.
CA esophagus, CA stomach, and CA colorectal carcinomas. Family history is very important.
Then, what else? When else is family history important? Polyps, no? Polyposis. Then, any other? Carcinoma pancreas, carcinoma ovary, ovarian cancer, endometrial cancers. They're all part of the same, no? Yeah, so that you can get. Dr. Sharonan, anything else that you would like to highlight?
Yes. So do you think this family history is significant? Could it be indicating this patient will he be a high risk for malignancies?
Yes, sir. He'll be in high risk for malignancy, sir, because any genetic mutation on the patient could be in terms significant for the patient for pancreas or any.
What is the importance of this died 5 years ago at the age of 75? Died 4 years ago at the age of 78. Does this give you any added information or just passing information?
You think it's sporadic, or you think it has got some added information that will help you to make a diagnosis now? You think this is the usual age? It's sporadic that okay, that's the age that the person gets carcinoma, esophagus, the other one may be chewing tobacco, so he gets at the age of 78. Or do you think it has got any relevance? Age. Just tell us the age of detection of carcinoma and the present case.
It's very old age of presentation of the carcinoma, ma'am, for the CA esophagus.
So is it likely to be syndromic or is it likely to be sporadic?
Sporadic, sir, 75 years and 78 years.
Yes. Yeah.
Because very late age of presentation.
So less likely that this patient is going to be at risk because this is likely to be sporadic, and it would be important to find out whether this esophagus was G-junction or was squamous. If it is squamous, it is less likely that it would be significant. Only if you have an adenocarcinoma, then you are thinking in terms of Lynch or something of that sort. Pancreatic cancer and duodenal cancers are a part of Lynch, so you have to keep that in mind. But at this stage, this appears more to be sporadic, and as Madam said, these are high risk features for tobacco-related behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat box. Can it be? Do you think hereditary pancreatitis has any significance in this particular case? Family history of hereditary pancreatitis.
Yes, ma'am. The patient hereditary pancreatitis can be useful, ma'am.
What's the age of presentation? What will be the age of presentation of carcinoma and hereditary pancreatitis? Will it be young age, middle age?
Middle age, ma'am. If the patient has to go into the chronic pancreatitis, then the patient has next stage to develop an CA pancreas, ma'am. So it will be in middle age, ma'am, 40s and 50 years age.
50 is too old, I think. Dr. Salman, what will be the approximate age of hereditary pancreatitis?
Yeah, I think it would be a little delayed only in the sixth decade only.
Yeah.
Fifth or sixth decade only.
So it is late. So therefore, that history may be important. Okay.
Okay.
Family history. So these are all the important things when it is relevant. You have to mention all that is mentioned here in this slide, but then you must understand whether it's related to your particular patient or not. Okay. So summarize. So what's your summary and what will be your provisional diagnosis?
So it's a 50-year-old male has a huge history of progressive jaundice associated with pale stools without pruritus, without any prodromal, came with an right upper quadrant pain with history of CAMS intake since 1 month. With no weight loss, and my syndromic diagnosis would be a cholestatic jaundice. So I would like to discuss extrahepatic versus intrahepatic. So in the extrahepatic, I would like to consider benign versus malignant. And intrahepatic, I would like to consider drug-induced liver injury.
So just tell us what are the benign and malignant conditions that you would consider in extrahepatic. You consider some benign, and you put benign ahead of malignancy.
In benign, I would like to consider first CBD calculi, and it's benign strictures.
Benign strictures, yes.
CBD calculi.
What are the other conditions? Infection, characterized by infection, inflammation, vascular, neoplastic. Keep all these 4 in mind, and miscellaneous.
Okay.
What are the infections can present?
Like patients having an biliary ascaria
Yeah, infections could be hydatid, it could be
Hydatid.
aspergillosis, tuberculosis.
tuberculosis.
And then you have the cryptosporia, age-related cholangiopathy. All these are infections. So once you get infection, again classify it as protozoal, viral, bacterial, and then fungal. Just keep all that in mind so that you have at least one example for each of them. That is infection. What about inflammation?
Inflammation, the patient might have an IgG4 related disorder.
It could be IgG4 cholangiopathy, number one, or it could be one of these overlap syndromes. Usually it's uncommon in males, and generally the presentation maybe it is still there, it's possible. So we cannot exclude the possibility. Infection, inflammation, then vascular.
Vascular portal biliopathy is
very good. So portal biliopathy or post-operative cholecystectomy with ischemic strictures. So these will be your, and then neoplastic. What will be the neoplastic differentials?
Neoplastic, like periampullary carcinoma.
So one is, again, like last time we discussed, will be distal biliary malignancy.
Distal biliary malignancy.
Out of the four distal, what are the possibilities? Distal 4 possibilities are?
Distal 4, distal cholangio.
There is abdominal pain. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So distal would be ampullary, carcinoma head.
Head of pancreas and distal cholangiocarcinoma.
Yeah, so what gets excluded is juxtapapillary and distal cholangio. These two get almost excluded, but you cannot dismiss the possibility of a distal cholangio as well. Can it be hilar cholangiocarcinoma? There is pain, there is jaundice for 2 weeks. So hilar will actually come as the first differential in this patient. No, the first differential because it's jaundice and therefore it's likely. Then gallbladder malignancy also should be kept in mind. Okay, so these will be your extrahepatic. And of course, nodes at the porta, of course, there's no early satiety, nausea, vomiting. So less likely or unlikely to be a secondary. And in intrahepatic, at least you have to keep bili in mind as one of the differentials.
Bili is one of the differentials.
So keep the benign and malignant. In benign tumors, anything that strikes your mind? Benign tumors can cause.
If the patient is having any pseudocyst, it was an obstruction.
Which one?
Pseudocyst of pancreas.
Yes, distal biliary stricture, yes.
Pseudocyst of pancreas and
any other benign causes?
Polydocus.
Large polydocus, yes. Good. What about group pancreatitis? Any thoughts on that?
Pancreatitis, yes, ma'am.
Dr. Sharaman?
Yeah, madam was asking about benign tumors also. So in that you have to keep in mind biliary cystadenoma. So biliary cystadenoma also can present with this kind of picture. Cholangitis is quite common. Yeah.
Okay.
And group pancreatitis, what is the what is the common presentation of group pancreatitis? What are the two common forms by which it presents? So one is pain and other is gastric outlet obstruction. So these are the common. You can have either spectrum of presentation. One spectrum will be where there is purely pain, and the other spectrum is where there is more of where the fibrosis will be predominant, where they will have gastric outlet features. Yeah.
Okay.
They'll unusual to get jaundice, which without severe disease and severe pain and gastric outlet features.
Okay.
So jaundice is uncommon, no?
Okay.
Can we just move on? Okay. Move on, Bhargav. Next slide. Yeah. So just read it.
50-year-old male without any comorbidities with past history of pulmonary cough 13 years back treated, now presented with complaints of progressive jaundice with pale stools without pruritus or prodromal symptoms, followed by right upper quadrant dull pain without any relation to food intake or bowel movement, without any history of liver decompensation, weight loss or anorexia, with history of Ayurvedic medicine intake for the last 1 month, and with the ECOG performance score of 0.
Next slide. So we've already got our differentials, no? Extrahepatics. What are the things you look for in examination of this patient? So if you shortlist your diagnosis, 1 minute, if you shortlist your diagnosis, which one will you consider, extrahepatic or intrahepatic?
First, I'll consider the extrahepatic, ma'am.
You have to consider extrahepatic, but balancing, it's only 2 weeks history, so therefore intrahepatic was also considered in this
Yes.
patient. Dr. Sharma, in the exam, they can balance between the two, no?
Yeah, you can.
Because drug-induced liver injury is there, it's a 2-week history. Ayurvedic
Yes.
is 1 month,
Yeah.
so we
Yeah.
cannot miss the possibility.
Yeah, we cannot completely rule out that.
Rule out the possibility of an intrahepatic cholestasis. So, what are the things you look for in examination?
First is patient's conscious and conscious level one, then followed by vitals, and I'll check for an general examination. I'll look for an icterus and pallor, edema, lymphadenopathy, any stigmata of chronic liver disease, and followed by on examination, I would look for there's on my any right upper quadrant tenderness on.
That's abdomen examination, general examination, anything else you look for in this particular patient where you have this differential. So one is scratch marks, then you have
Scratch marks, tiny nails, scratch marks.
those will be there. Then other things would be what? Left supraclavicular lymph node, you have to look for Irish node, you have to look for systemic Joseph node, you have to look for migrating thrombophlebitis, you have to look for, because these are all in differentials. If you consider it as DILI, if it's only DILI, then you don't just look for cholestasis. The other important thing is always remember you have to measure the nutritional, measure the requirement, but deficiencies 2 weeks is too early. Okay, so just remember long-standing cholestasis. You may have to highlight the vitamin deficiencies, the soluble vitamin deficiency. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Next slide. An examination of the abdomen. What will you look for in this particular patient? We discussed this last time also. So just start off. What are the things you look for? You look for a liver that's enlarged.
Enlarged liver.
And maybe a differential enlargement. Okay.
Okay.
Differential enlargement may be there. You have to palpate gallbladder palpability. Mass will never be palpable. Be very careful. Carcinoma head of pancreas never ever presents with a mass. Okay. If at all you get a mass with obstructive jaundice, it will be more like a pseudocyst. Serous adenomas are all more towards the tail. So you don't usually, jaundice per se is not a feature of a mass in the pancreas, except when you have these IgG4 types of or autoimmune pancreatitis, but not in malignancy. So mass you'll never spend time looking for a mass. Okay. What else will you look for? Spleen. The answer should be spontaneous. You should look for a differential enlargement of the liver. See whether the liver is disproportionately enlarged epigastrium. Look carefully for a gallbladder. Look for a spleen that is enlarged. Can you get a splenomegaly in this patient?
Splenomegaly.
What's your answer? Portal thrombosis, splenic vein thrombosis or portal vein thrombosis, no? Because that's the surface marking, no? In the head of the pancreas. So that is important. So you look for it. You look for a splenomegaly. And in case, and then of course, surface of the liver you have to look for, whether it is smooth, whether there is nodularity, whether there is smooth, whether the consistency is firm or the consistency is hard. All these are the important things that you look for. Upper border liver dullness, very, very important, because if you have upward enlargement, then chances of you having a mass in the liver is more likely. So upward enlargement is important. Next slide, and Dr. Saranan can just discuss few points on clinical examination. Next slide, Bhargav. So this describe.
Abdomen shape is flat. There was no visible vein, striae or scars, no visible varicolicities, no hernias or genitals are normal, and gallbladder is palpable, liver spleen not palpable. Abdominal girth is 92 centimeters.
Okay, just stop there. Dr. Saranan, any important points that you would like to highlight for the examination?
Yes, in examination, whether the gallbladder is palpable or not, is there any hepatomegaly, is there any splenomegaly, is there any free fluid? So these would be the important things to look for.
And the rectal examination. Rectal examination is important.
Okay.
Okay, so what's your inference now at this stage?
So the gallbladder is palpable. So like I would like to review my differential on this one. The benign thing I would like to define like CBD calculus. I would like to keep it in the last.
Come on, keep talking. Yeah.
The CBD calculator, keep it in the last, and
You should tell us
because-
what you want to keep as first.
First
Don't
tell
tell
us.
the last thing.
Yeah.
was the gallbladder palpable? Was it soft or
What's
it
your first diagnosis? What's
With the
your-
gallbladder palpable, are you thinking intrahepatic, extrahepatic?
extrahepatic, sir?
Come out with that first, right? So you say, now I'm thinking extrahepatic cause. Okay, then you
I'm
tell us in
thinking
extrahepatic, what are you thinking?
Extrahepatic,
Are
I
you
would
thinking of
like
a hilar cause, or you're thinking of a distal bile duct cause?
distal pancreas, distal ductal causes, sir, mainly.
That should be
Distal
an
ductal
ex.
causes. I
Okay,
would like
then you
to
tell us in
consider
distal duct
periambular.
only.
Distal duct, I like to consider periambulary, sir.
Why
like
not
to
stone? Why not stone disease?
Stone disease, yes, sir. But because the gallbladder is palpable, distal CBD unlikely to be palpable.
So in stone disease, why gallbladder will not be palpable?
Sir, it is an chronic process according to Cuvier law.
In stone disease, why would gallbladder be not palpable?
Sir, it will be atrophic, sir.
Chronic cholecystitis, no? So you
Well,
can get
chronic disease, it will be atrophic, sir. So it is not palpable in stone disease, sir.
Sorry, Harish, I could not hear you. Why is gallbladder not palpable in stone disease?
So it is chronic cholecystitis, sir.
I mean, this patient never had cholecystitis. He never had recurrent episodes of pain. What if this is the first episode of biliary pain that he's having? And there is a stone which is impacted in the neck of the GB that is pressing on the bile duct, something like a Mirizi.
There is, yes.
So in other words, when is gallbladder palpable in stone disease? Tell us the process.
If the patient is having a double stone impaction in the cystic duct and the CBD, or the one is Mersey syndrome.
The disease, yes. Number 3,
Mersey syndrome.
empyema, xanthomatosis granulomatosis. These are all other conditions when you can get a gallbladder that's palpable in a chronic condition. Chronic. Mucocele of the gallbladder, empyema. And when will gallbladder not be palpable in carcinoma of the pancreas? What percentage will have a palpable gallbladder, and what percentage you may not feel a gallbladder is not palpable?
In the pancreas, if it is in the body and distal pancreatic carcinoma, gallbladder is not palpable. In the head of the pancreas, when it is between the distal CBD, then the gallbladder is palpable.
In head pancreas, when is the time you will still not find the gallbladder palpable? That is what madam is asking.
When is Purvasia's law not applicable? Just think nonsense. Associated stone disease again, no?
Okay.
Associated stone disease, gallbladder on the undersurface of the gallbladder fossa will not be palpable.
Stented patient.
A stented patient, post cholecystectomy. All these are logical answers. Answers when is gallbladder does not obey the Purvasia's law. Okay? So you must know the law. Any other question you should know? It should be okay.
That's fine
Okay.
for the examination.
Next slide. Investigations. You just continue quickly. So nothing much is not palpable. Just finish off that. Examination is normal. Now, how will you investigate this patient?
So now, first, I would like to do an.
This particular patient was actually on a teleconsult. Okay. So what should I tell him on the phone, on the teleconsult, during the teleconsult? He comes on a teleconsult and says, "This is what I have for the 2 weeks." What should I tell him? What should he do?
First, I'll ask him to get blood investigations done with CBC, LFTs, ESR, CRP, ma'am, and we'd like to check
so much time on that because I have to take a call. No, I just want to know. So I'll ask for a liver function test. Why should I ask for LFT? Liver biochemistry?
ma'am, any like the patient is having any underlying cholangitis, elevated total count.
The patient has got drug-induced liver injury. No? So you think it will be of any help? In liver biochemistry.
Liver biochemistry, I would like to ask, ma'am. I'd like to see the total bilirubin.
And what else?
And ALT, AST, alkaline phosphatase, and GGT levels.
That I know. Those are all the components. So just tell what do you expect in drug-induced liver injury vis-a-vis a person with obstructive jaundice.
In the drug-induced liver injury, expect increase in the ALT levels, and even elevated alkaline phosphatase levels will be there. Around the twofold increase in alkaline phosphatase levels will be there.
And if it is extrahepatic?
Extrahepatic, there will be an increase in gamma GT will be present.
What are the what are the other things that will tell you that you're dealing with extrahepatic biliary obstruction? AST, ALT will not be significantly elevated. How many times have we discussed this? And alphas, gamma, GT. So in the exam, we'll ask you how many fold increase do you get? You have to know the fold increase. Supposing the normal value is 40, what do you expect? So you'll expect 1 or 2 fold increase in extrahepatic. Whereas in intrahepatic, you'll expect almost a 5 to 10 fold, depending on the type of the drug that the patient has taken. And alphas, gamma, GT will also be 5 to 10 times elevated. So that's how you answer. And
direct or indirect fraction, that also will be
direct quantitative. And what will happen to the albumin? Albumin will be normal. There's no. It will be normal. The reason normal is because it is all within the 21 days. Average time is around 21 days. So you don't expect abnormal albumin. So answers should come out spontaneously. Then what else should I ask? So I asked for a liver function test, liver biochemistry. I asked for a CBC. CBC, why not just tell 1 or 2 points for CBC?
CBC, like to check for hemoglobin levels, and next is the total count levels and the platelets.
What will be the platelet count? Okay.
Thrombocytosis can be present in malignancies.
Malignancy, if you're not looking for thrombocyte, very inflammatory response also you'll get a thrombocytosis. So that will not be helpful. And then next, what do you ask?
Next, like to go for an renal function test. And after that, I'll go for an ultrasound abdomen.
Ultrasound scan of the abdomen, looking for, keep answering. Looking for
ultrasound abdomen, to looking for any checking for gallstones and dilatation of the ducts.
Will be upstream dilatation of the
ducts and
CHD, CBD. Look for double duct sign. Look for gallbladder. Switch on the Doppler. Look for any portal vein invasion. See the portal blood flow. See that all are patent, and then look for collaterals around the hilum, and look for a stenoidy. So, and of course, a distended gallbladder with or without stone disease. Okay, move on. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, Dr. Sharonan, anything else? Can we move on?
We can move on. Yeah.
Okay. So just magnify it a bit. Hemoglobin is, I think, 14.
Normal, ma'am. Hemoglobin is normal. Total count is 6,800 normal.
Just come down. Platelet count. Come down.
4.2 lakhs.
Okay, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Just magnify it a bit.
ESR is elevated, ma'am. Fasting glucose is 121, pre-diabetic state. RFT creatinine is normal. LFT is showing an direct fraction with threefold increase in fivefold increase in ALT and threefold increase in AST.
So there's a significant increase, almost tenfold increase in
tenfold increase ALT.
And gamma GT is also elevated and alpha. So what's your interpretation of this now?
Ma'am, the patient is having an extrahepatic obstruction, and the increase in ALT levels could be an sign of the drug-induced liver injury. And also
probably having a mixed
pattern.
Mixed pattern of a cholestatic failure.
Exactly.
Dr. Shavanan, would you like to ask some questions?
If the albumin, if suppose was low, in this kind of a picture, say the albumin was 2, how will you interpret that?
Sir, if the patient is having a long-standing history, it is a negative inflammatory response factor, sir. So any patient with having an inflammation, there can be a low albumin also in the patient, sir.
So basically, you would be interested in seeing whether the patient has cholangitis or not. If it's this cholangitis, active inflammation, it is a C-reactive It is an
Negative
inflammatory
phase,
marker.
negative phase, yeah.
Barbara, just magnify.
Albumin can suddenly go low.
Dr. Sharoni, could you just repeat that? Albumin can be low due to inflammatory response.
It's an acute phase reactant.
Okay.
So it can go down even, yeah. So sometimes you will see post-op, many times we see that post-op day 2, day 3, if you do the albumin, suddenly it will come down to 2.2.
Okay.
Albumin has a half-life of nearly 3 weeks. Why should it come down so quickly? It's an acute phase reactant, so you have to interpret it in that sense. Otherwise, you should not think that patient has some decompensated liver disease also.
Sure. Okay, next slide. So triglycerides are elevated, okay? Just keep that in mind.
Okay.
Okay. Electrolytes are normal, hepatitis B is negative. Next slide. Move on. Next slide. Okay, ultrasound. Now just read that.
The liver is normal in size.
Mm.
Liver is normal in size. There is a mild intra and extrahepatic biliary duct dilatation seen, and common hepatic duct is dilated, measuring 14 mm. The gallbladder is moderately distended and containing thick sludge. There are multiple tiny GB wall polyps of size 4 to 5 mm seen within the body. Cystic duct is dilated in the proximal part, measuring 10 mm. The distal confluence of the common bile duct is not seen because of the overlying bowel gas. There are few peripancreatic and peri-GB enlarged lymph nodes seen, largest measuring 2.1 into 1.3 centimeters. The pancreatic head and part of the body are seen and shows normal configuration and ecotexture. Distal one third of the body and the pancreas are not visualized. So this suggestive of an intrahepatic and there is an IHBRD with cystic common bile duct dilatation. Probably the distal part could not be evaluated with this ultrasound abdomen. So probably we might need the next level imaging.
What's your interpretation of the gallbladder polyp? Come, just discuss few points on gallbladder polyp. We never get to discuss that.
Gallbladder polyp is
How sure are you it's a polyp and not a stone?
based on the echogenicity they describe it as.
Any other?
And
Dr. Sharonan, can you just tell few points on polyp?
So more than the echogenicity, what is the main difference between a stone? Stones will have a posterior acoustic shadowing, right? So that will not be there. And the other thing is when you change position, stones will move, polyps will not move. Okay. But having said that, often polyps are misinterpreted to be stones and stones are misinterpreted to be polyps. So keep in mind that stones is not still completely out. Okay, and since the pancreas relatively appears normal and you're not able to visualize the mid and the lower part of the CBD, you have to, and since there is some sludge also, you can still have the possibility of stones even after the ultrasound. Yeah.
And Merices as a phenomenon. No?
Yeah.
But can you just tell about the polyp, the size of the polyp, and when polycystictomy? We seldom get to discuss that point.
You look at the high risk factors. High risk factors are number one is solitary versus multiple, sessile versus what is the opposite of sessile? Pedunculated. Age of the patient and one more PSC. So these are the high risk factors. If there is a single large polyp, that is a high risk factor. If the polyp is more than 7 millimeter by this is the Japanese cutoff, otherwise most other cutoffs are about 1 centimeter. Age again more than 60 or 70, depending upon the cutoffs, and in presence of primary sclerosing cholangitis, regardless of any size. So these are the 4 risk factors. If you have high risk factors, then the risk of malignancy is higher. Otherwise, you can just keep them on follow-up.
Okay. The cutoff has changed, 7 millimeter and 1 centimeter. Okay, so just read about gallbladder polyp. That's something that can happen. Next slide. So what's the next higher imaging you want? Next slide. Next,
I'll go for an CT.
Next slide.
Why you want to do a CT? Why not an endoscopic ultrasound?
There are look at one. CT will give it has a very higher sensitivity and almost equivalent to
Actually, for detecting what?
detecting any mass lesions, sir. And staging also, it's more, if it is staging, it is more possible with CT imaging rather than in US.
So this is a very tricky question. You cannot say that. See, based on the ultrasound, we know that the pathology is more or less localized in the distal bile duct, right?
Okay, sir.
So you have all three. You have US, you have MRCP, you have CT. So which one will you choose and why?
Sir, I will like to choose MRI contrast with MR2 ma'am, because MRI contrast is almost equivalent sensitive to CT, and moreover, the distal pathology showing and
Yeah. So I was saying that endoscopic ultrasound also is a competitive modality in such a situation. You cannot take away endoscopic ultrasound.
Okay.
US is a simple. It is much easier. You can almost give a definite diagnosis, no?
Okay.
And you can take tissue biopsy. You can do any of those things. So what are the advantages of US?
US is like for an smaller lesions which could not be detected on CT.
In the present days, US will give you the complete local regional staging, and you can even take a tissue biopsy if required. Okay, whereas the other two would be all more of a static imaging. No, you will not be able to take a biopsy. It will give you some information on the staging, including lymph node staging and all. People are doing a real good job with the US nowadays. No, doctor?
Yeah, the only advantage that you will get about from a CT is it will give you a complete abdominal surveillance. US will not be able to tell you whether there is any free fluid, whether there is any omental nodules, whether there are any liver metastasis. So all that will not be there. So if you know for sure you're dealing with the malignancy, yes, CT will be helpful. But if stone disease is still on the cards, endoscopic ultrasound also is a good modality.
And when you ask for a CT, always ask for the pancreatic protocol, pancreatic protocol, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so can we just move on, Bhargav? So the patient had, just go to the report, no? We want to discuss the surgical aspect. Move on. Move on. So just move on. Let's see the report. So that we can take up the management. Next slide. Bhargav, next slide. Yeah, so this
there is an ill-defined minimally enhancing mass of size 2.5 into 2.5 centimeters is seen in the head or the uncinate process of pancreas. Fat plane between the mass and second part of duodenum appears indistinct in the pancreatic duodenal groove. There is an abrupt cutoff of distal CBD with proximal CBD dilatation measuring 17 mm. And the main pancreatic duct is draining into the ampulla just inferior to the lesion, and main pancreatic duct is mildly dilated, measuring 3.4 mm. And there is bilobar intrahepatic biliary dilatation noted, and no significant lymphadenopathy. And mass appears adherent to the distal gastroduodenal artery. Otherwise, rest of the arteries appears normal.
Spleen is normal, gallbladder is normal. No
spleen is normal. No, yes, no free flow.
Okay, now you can take over, Dr. Sharon. Can you take over the management?
Yeah. So now now what is your diagnosis based on the CT?
So based on the CT, my diagnosis like to consider the CA head of pancreas, extrahepatic biliary obstruction caused by the CA head of pancreas.
Okay.
And it seems to be there are no lymphadenopathy involvement.
Okay, so there is a lesion in the head of the pancreas, no lymph nodes.
No lymph nodes.
How is the regional involvement?
Regional involvement, it's showing an distal GDA involvement, but other than celiac axis is not involved, sir.
Yeah.
And the SMA also is not involved.
So the major arteries would are the SMV portal vein and SMA is free. Only the gastroduodenal artery is involved. That as long as it is not encroaching onto the hepatic artery, we are fine. Okay. Can this be neuroendocrine carcinoma?
Neuroendocrine carcinoma. Yes.
Can this be neuroendocrine?
Yes, sir. Possibility is there, sir.
Possibility is there. What would be the imaging features that can distinguish between a neuroendocrine carcinoma versus a adenocarcinoma?
Neuroendocrine carcinoma are highly vascular tumors. Sir.
Correct.
So there will be an highly enhancement in the arterial phase. Sir.
Okay.
Compared to the adenocarcinomas.
Good.
And how would the adenocarcinomas be?
And
the adenocarcinomas are usually not very well enhancing. They are often hypodense and they are more ill-defined. Yeah, but neuroendocrine are usually well-defined and they will be hyper-enhancing. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
This one ill-defined is in favor of adenocarcinoma. Minimally enhancing is somewhere between the two, but since it is ill-defined, going with the and also the neuroendocrine can be of variable size. The adenocarcinoma usually will be diffuse kind of in behavior appearance.
Okay.
So with this, so we are dealing with a head of pancreas malignancy. What would be the next investigation for staging or completing the staging?
Completing the staging, next investigation, PET CT, sir.
Okay. Or can I just do a CT of the chest?
CT of the chest, yes, sir. CT of the chest with sufficient, sir.
And is the so this is, you think it is operable or it is inoperable?
Sir, it is I feel that no idea about this mass adherent to the distal GDA, sir, whether it comes under a borderline resectability or
so as long as it doesn't involve the hepatic artery. GDA is a branch from where, by any chance you remember?
No, sir.
So gastroduodenal artery comes from the common hepatic artery. Okay. So as long as the common hepatic artery is not involved, it's only the distal GDA, it is okay, because in the Whipple's procedure, we ligate the gastroduodenal artery. Okay. And it is a very important landmark because whenever there is a pancreatic leak and there is an aneurysm that is commonly involves the gastroduodenal artery, okay, which we then get embolized. Yeah. Okay. So that anyways will get ligated, so it doesn't come in the way of surgery.
It's a resectable carcinoma. So
do you tissue diagnosis? Do you need a tissue diagnosis before?
No, when it is a resectable carcinoma, tissue diagnosis is not required.
No, how certain are you that it is only carcinoma and nothing else? Can it just be tuberculosis nodes and glands around there?
There are no nodal involvement, according to this one, and moreover, the
very close mimickers. There are quite a few occasions when Whipple's has been done for IgG4 and autoimmune pancreatitis. Then we've also had Whipple's for tuberculosis. So sometimes it's extremely difficult. So what is your thought process on this? Surgery versus benign versus malignancy. What's your thought process? So to err on the other side, so that you don't miss a malignancy, the best of centers, you'd rather go for Whipple's.
Whipple's, okay.
Rather than go for wasting your time treating for tuberculosis. That's why EUS is definitely important. No, to give you a good.
Yeah, the morphology on EUS is very important. It will help you differentiate between IgG4, tuberculosis, and you can take sampling also. You can do. Okay. So EUS is very important.
Okay.
Supposing I say that, you want to do a CT guided biopsy versus EUS guided? What is your thought process?
I'd like to go for an EUS guided, ma'am. CT guided, there is a chance of tumor seeding in the peritoneum. So EUS guided is still better because it's the head of the pancreas, which could be hit easily from the duodenum or stomach.
So what happens if you have it in the duodenum?
Because if it is a malignant, then we are going ahead with the Whipple's procedure. So pancreatic duodenectomy will be done for the patient. So there is
will be taken out. Yeah, so
tumor will be taken out.
Next slide, I think. Maybe.
And the other thing that you have to see in a CT whenever there is a pancreatic head mass are there any changes of chronic pancreatitis?
Okay. That's the last slide. So Dr. Sharon, you can just tell us the management now. Just management of carcinoma.
Yeah,
So
so if
it had ripples anyway. It turned out as well differentiated adenocarcinoma, and he had a little bit of mets in the surrounding tissue, but nodes were negative. Okay, he's on adjuvant therapy. So now we can have a theoretical discussion.
So if imaging is suggestive of head of pancreas lesion, next we look at the local involvement of vessels. If there is no local involvement of vessels, then and there is no distant spread, then there is a role for surgery. If there is a local involvement of vessels, if is it a short segment involvement, is it a resectable and reconstructable involvement? If that is there, then there are two things. One, do you consider it as a borderline resectable or locally advanced? Locally advanced goes for chemotherapy with radiotherapy and then reassessment. Borderline resectable, depending upon the expertise available and multidisciplinary discussion, it will either go for upfront surgery or it will go for chemoradiotherapy and then for surgery. More and more now there is a push towards neoadjuvant therapy because surgery, when you do a surgery, it is Whipple's resection. The most critical factor which determines the outcome after a Whipple surgery is the retropancreatic margin or the uncinate margin. If the tumor is involving that and that margin comes positive, the chances of recurrence is going to be very high. So in that situation, a CTRT is very good upfront so that that area is sterilized. And in a Whipple's procedure, what is important is if it is a distal bile duct tumor, it is important to see that the margin on the bile duct side is free. If needed, a frozen section may have to be done. And if it is a pancreatic head lesion, you must, and if there is a doubt of a cystic neoplasm of pancreas, like an IPMN or IPMN which has turned malignant, then it is important to get a margin on the pancreatic ductal side. Send that for a frozen section. Otherwise, routinely we don't send the pancreatic margin for frozen. And
Can you just tell the difference between local
and what are the components of? So loco-regional involvement, locally advanced pancreatic cancer will have significant involvement of the SMA more than 180 degree or of the celiac axis, or it will be a long segment superior mesenteric vein, portal vein involvement, which cannot be reconstructed. If it is a short segment involvement of the superior mesenteric vein, portal vein, or if the tumor abutment between the artery, celiac and or SMA is less than 180 degree and it is reconstructible, it is borderline.
Okay. So all the short segments with less than 180 degree is borderline.
Yes.
And any difference? Both will receive a new adjuvant, both groups.
So borderline, there is a little bit of a dilemma where you can offer upfront surgery, but more and more now there is a push towards neoadjuvant, and in that again there is a debate between chemotherapy and radiotherapy because there are comparable outcomes seen with both neoadjuvant chemo as well as neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy. Only there is probably a very small subgroup of patients where chemoradiotherapy is beneficial. But of late, again, there is a push towards chemoradiotherapy because they say that it also facilitates surgery. Post radiotherapy, the surgery with the soft pancreas is a very high risk factor for pancreatic leak after surgery. After radiotherapy, the pancreas becomes a little strong, so the chances of leak and all are less. So, especially in the US, there is a push for neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy and then take for surgery.
What is
and also, otherwise, you have to radiate in the post-operative period. Post-operatively radiating in that area is difficult in presence of the intestine, so that it's better to radiate them upfront.
What will be the question? Duration of chemo RT? I mean, the gap between surgery and chemo RT?
So usually you will wait for about 4 weeks. 4 weeks.
Okay. after chemotherapy.
After chemotherapy. Yeah.
And I think little bit you have to know the components. What are the components of ripples and what are the anastomosis that you would do? That is the second question. And then pylorus preserving versus non-pylorus preserving ripples. I think that's the other thing that you should know. And of course, lymphatic drainage. Anything else they should know, Dr. Sharon? I think they should know this. Yeah, loco-regional, borderline. I think they should know.
And probably if this patient comes for surveillance or for endoscopy, what would you be seeing? So when you would be, depending upon what kind of reconstruction that has been, so you will be seeing a gastrojejunostomy, and if it will be usually a roux reconstruction or a single loop construction. If it is a single loop, you will be able to see the other anastomosis as well, that is the pancreaticojejunostomy and the hepaticojejunostomy. If it is a roux loop, a separate isolated limb, then you will be able to see only the gastrojejunostomy.
So endoscopy, you should know what will be the findings at endoscopy. It's difficult,
And also another this thing is whenever there is a bleed, the endoscopist may be called. So especially if it is there is the other alternative to a pancreaticojejunostomy is a pancreaticogastrostomy. So usually if the duct is undilated, many people do a pancreaticogastrostomy. So where the pancreas will be invaginated into the stomach. So in that you can visualize it, and you can also perform APC coagulation of the pancreatic stump. So that is another situation where an endoscopist will be called.
The pancreas per se is incorporated, is it, or only the duct?
No, the whole pancreas will be
okay.
Will be invaginated into the stomach.
What happens to the lipase then? It doesn't get destroyed by the acid.
That is the counter argument for not performing this thing. That the functionality will be lost because the long-term quality of life and digestion and nutritional aspects are a concern. But technically, it is easier, and if there is a bleed, it's very easy to manage. If it is a bleed from the pancreaticojejunostomy, generally your endoscope will not reach up to there because of the long roux loop. So it is difficult to manage. Then we have to reoperate. So many people do a pancreaticogastrostomy.
Oh, pancreaticogastrostomy. Okay, it's easier to. Okay. Any other things they should know? I think these are the main.
Yeah. And CA99 would be tumor marker would be important since it is a head of pancreas tumor. Diagnostic laparoscopy will be important for head of pancreas as well as distal pancreas tumors. If it is gallbladder cancer, pancreatic head cancer, a diagnostic laparoscopy before proceeding to surgery is very important. Only if it is a periampullary tumor or a cholangiocarcinoma, diagnostic laparoscopy is not warranted.
And the difference in neoadjuvant therapy, borderline, and chemotherapy locally advanced?
The neoadjuvant is similar in both. Gemcitabine cisplatin based chemotherapy. More aggressive regimens like FOLFIRINOX and all are being used now with good results. But again, tolerability in Indian patients is an issue.
What about Harish, CA99 in this patient?
CA99 levels they are only used for an prognostication. If the CA99 levels are elevated prior to surgery, then probably the patient might having an distant metastasis, and having a high CA99 post-operative also is a sign of a bad prognosis.
Any cutoff you think would be of help? Supposing I ask you what the role of CA99 in carcinoma of pancreas, what are your thoughts? What are the things that you should know? One is chronic pancreatitis, no? Pancreatitis as a risk factor. There they have a cutoff. There's a different cutoff for that compared to if the bilirubin is elevated, then again you may get a false infections, again you may get a false value. So therefore, very high levels, yes, it will give you a clue, but otherwise you don't do it. Okay. I think these are some of the questions. Anything else they should know, Dr. Saranan? I think this is sufficient for them.
A patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, a patient with chronic pancreatitis, when would you suspect that they are developing a pancreatic head cancer?
Um, the CA99 levels are above 120, sir. Persistent.
Okay, one is a increasing CA99. One, then anything else? In history, that will there be anything which is very peculiar in a patient with the chronic pancreatitis?
There are different episodes, sir. Uh, Patient
So
is having a long-standing diabetes, sir.
yes. So what happens to that?
It's a long-standing diabetes is a risk factor for CA pancreas, sir.
No, what happens is that when chronic pancreatitis patients develop pancreatic head cancer, their sugar, they become suddenly the diabetes will become uncontrolled. So, whenever the diabetes becomes brittle and uncontrolled suddenly in background of chronic pancreatitis, you should suspect malignancy.
Okay.
Yeah, and second is change in the nature of the pain. So the pain which is there, which has been more or less intermittent, and there is a sudden change in the nature of the pain, then also you have to suspect that is there a malignant transformation. And if there is a biliary stricture associated with chronic pancreatitis, how will you distinguish that this is to do with the malignancy or is it inflammatory?
It could be an,
Morphology,
mal-
morphology of the stricture.
it could be an benign or malignant, sir. Both.
Yes.
Could be an benign or malignant. So in order to differentiate it, we need an US or an breast cytology to differentiate that, sir.
No, tell me based on the morphology, can you say what is more towards malignancy and what is more towards appearance? So if if it is a long segment, it is usually long segment are inflammatory, short segment are malignant. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, and also the trend of the LFT is important.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Trend, what is it? What do you want to convey? Trend of LFT?
So if there is a rapid increase in the transaminases or the alkaline phosphatase, again, it has to be, you have to keep in the possibility of malignancy.
When would you like to have a drainage, Harish, in a patient? What are the indications for endotherapy?
Drainage is for any patients undergoing any borderline resectability or any for palliative stenting. The borderline resectability patient needs an neoadjuvant therapy. In those conditions, the patient has to undergo an drainage of the elevated bilirubin. Either it's a plastic stent or an metallic stent. So, with the and in the case of an palliative stenting, the patient might undergoing an chemotherapy. In those conditions, also the patient needs an drainage of the biliary system. So, if it is an unresectable sir, then the patient is likely to benefit from an metallic stenting because it is more patent rather than
presence of uncontrolled pruritus or cholangitis, not otherwise. Not otherwise. Okay, but just remember the hepatogastrostomy in the present days, no US guided.
Okay.
So you can do a direct ligation.
And can you, will you want to put a metallic stent for a preoperative setting?
Sir, they are currently biliary stent is advisable for an borderline resectable also they are advising the biliary metallic stent.
Is there any other thought process? Is there a trend towards metallic stents? What is the advantage of a metallic stent over a plastic stent?
Sir, plastic stent is only patent for 3 months, sir, and high likely chance of obstructions are there.
So there is again a moving trend, I believe, that of using metallic stent upfront for even a preoperative stenting because it will lead to early control of the cholangitis and chances of migration and all that is going to be less. So patient recovers very quickly from the cholangitis and patient comes for surgery quickly. So there is again a moving thought towards using metal stents in a preoperative setting as well.
Okay.
Some nuance that is worsening pain, this one, something about the use of albumin-bound paclitaxel over plain paclitaxel. I do not know.
There it is supposed to be the NAB paclitaxel, the albumin bound is supposed to be better, but I'm not the expert on that to say what is the exact advantage. The medical oncologist will be able to tell better.
Yeah. So just read about endotherapy. When endotherapy, because most of the patients who come to us are usually advanced. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's, but this particular patient, he came within 2 weeks. Even then, it was locally invasive. It was not. It was not that. It was totally resectable. There was little local invasion. So he's on adjuvant. Okay.
Okay.
I think that should conclude the session. Any other thing that they should know, Dr. Sharani?
Yeah, that
Ampullary carcinoma, anything they should know specifically?
ampullary carcinoma, nothing much. Only thing is, the other interesting question that is often asked in an exam is, you have done your ultrasound, and what is the role of a side viewing endoscopy? At which stage are you going to consider doing a side viewing endoscopy? This patient, you did an ultrasound, after that you did a CT.
Yes, sir.
We discussed about EUS. What is the role of side viewing endoscopy?
So then the patient is having the same jaundice, having any gastric outlet type of symptoms. In those conditions, better go for an direct side endoscopy or forward doing a side
Gastric outlet obstruction, you will not be able to reach there, no?
for an if it is an ampullary, the side endoscopy helps in taking the biopsies.
Okay.
And it will, then tissue diagnosis will be very early in those stages.
So when you do your ultrasound and you know for sure that you're dealing with a infracystic pathology, side viewing endoscopy comes first. Okay, if it is a hilar pathology, then CT comes first. And the other situation where a side viewing endoscopy will come first is when there is some cholangitis. When you want to when there is an indication for ERCP at the same time, then there is a definite role for a side viewing endoscopy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also know what's the significance of a bulky ampulla. No, normally you come out with this information with the side viewing bulky ampulla.
Okay.
So, and also look at the ampullary opening so that all the other features will be known. Most of the times it is large and bulky and usually more falling downward. It's very difficult to see the growth beneath that. That's the usual problem. But side viewing is an important investigation. As Sir said, for distal, I think side viewing should come up.
Okay.
And proximal, he said CT, so that's a nice point. Follow-up is for how long?
Follow-up is 6 monthly for the first 2 years. It will be the tumor marker CA99, ultrasound abdomen, chest X-ray, and after the end of 1 year, we would like to do a CT. If facilities are available, it was a head pancreas, a PET CT. And after 2 years, a yearly follow-up is.
Role of PET CT in CA pancreas?
Head of pancreas, yes. Otherwise, not. For ampullary tumor, cholangio, it is not necessary.
Not indicated. Any other questions? I think Harish, you did a good job. Good presentation, no?
Thank you.
I'm sure he'll agree, no? Because he answered most of the questions, I think.
Yeah, he presented well.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shavanan. I think we may have